Hi, this is Rabbi Orlofsky, and this is the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. And whether you're watching with our friends and producers over at Torah Anytime, or wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts, as always, we're happy to have you along as we finish the Hanukkah holiday together with you. And I have another Hanukkah tie. There's that sort of light look to it over there. I hope it captures a little bit of the Hanukkah spirit. I bet you there must be these novelty Hanukkah ties. I have to go out and get one, with like menorahs or dreidels on them or something. But for now, I figure a nice bright yellow tie will definitely capture that sense of light. Hanukkah is the festival of light. Yeah.
Hi, it's Rabbi Orlofsky. I have to do something that I have never done beforehand. The episode that you're watching was filmed in advance, and it was sponsored as a refuah shelaima for Yocheved Rivka bas Chaya and a refuah shelaima for Bracha bas Basya. In between filming and the episode coming out, unfortunately, Bracha bas Mendel was nifteris. So we're changing the dedication as a refuah shelaima for Yocheved Rivka bas Chaya and L'Ilui nishmas Bracha bas Mendel. And so the neshama should have an aliyah, and Yocheved Rivka should have a refuah shelaima, and Yetz Hashem, all the tefillas of the good people who watch this show will join together to give her a refuah shelaima and a nechama to all of Bracha bas Mendel's loved ones.
I've told this story. My wife was reading the Hamodia, and one of my teenage girls says, "What are you doing?" Says, "I'm reading the paper." Goes, No, your lips were moving. She says, "I was at a shir, and they said, when you ask to daven for somebody, you don't have to just write down the name and wait for Shemona Esrei. You could write on the spot, say a kapitel tehillim." I know people who, when an ambulance goes by, they right away say a kapitel tehillim for whoever's in the ambulance. And you have that option to say it right away. So she says, so there was a little thing in the Hamodia, a little ad where it said, please say, tehillim for so-and-so for a refuah shelaima. And so I took the advice, and I right away said a kapitel tehillim. My kids were very impressed, So if you want to put the show on pause just for a moment, I'll tell you the names again. Yocheved Rivka bas Chaya should have a refuah shelaima.
And L'Ilui nishmas Bracha bas Mendel. The neshama should have an aliyah.
Okay, at the end of Hanukkah, the last day of Hanukkah is known as Zos Chanukah. And the reason is, of course, that during Hanukkah, we read the gifts that the Nesiim brought on each day of Hanukkah for the first 7 days. And we go from Shevet by Shevet, and that's what we read during that day. We read that particular gift of that particular Nasi every day of Hanukkah until, now there were 12 Shvatim, so there were 12 gifts. So that only gets us to 7. So on the 8th day, you have a much longer laning, because you have to do the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and then the summation, where it says Zos Chanukah HaMizbeach, and then it adds up everything that was brought, and it's much longer. So nothing in Judaism is by chance. And so the significance is that Zos Chanukah is a more important day. Why is that? So, let us take you, if we can, to the Brisa in the second parak of Shabbos, which discusses Hanukkah. There is no Mishnah that discusses Hanukkah because the story of Hanukkah was left out of the Mishnah because, says the Chassam Sofer, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was upset at the Chashmonaim because the Chashmonaim were Kohanim. And so the last surviving brother of the Maccabees, Shimon HaMaccabee, he set himself up temporarily as Nasi, hoping to transfer it over to Malchus, but his descendants decided to take the Malchus for themselves away from Shevet Yehuda. Since Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, being the Nasi, was descended from Dovid, he was upset at them for this. And therefore, he left them out of the Mishnah when he put together the Mishnah. But we have brises in the second parak of Shabbos, where it talks about Bameh Madliki and how you light the Shabbos candles, and we go from there to the Hanukkah candles. So it says, what is the mitzvah of Hanukkah? How do you light on Hanukkah? The answer is, Ner Ish Ubeisai. Every family, every day of Hanukkah, lights one candle. That's it. That is the mitzvah of Hanukkah. Mahadran, if you want to do the mitzvah Mahadran, everyone in the house lights one candle every day. Okay? Mahadran, mina Mahadran, that's Machlekes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says you light the first day 8, and then 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And Beis Hillel says you light the first day 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Beis Shammai says you light 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, based on the Parei HaChag, the bulls that were offered up on Sukkot. You bring 70 altogether. 7 days of Sukkot. Every day you should bring 10, but we don't. We bring the first day 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. We go in descending order. Now, a lot of Mefarshim try to understand what in the world Ner Chanukah has to do with Parei HaChag, but that's what Beis Shammai says. Beis Hillel says, Malim v'kodesh ve'en moridin. You go up in Kedusha and you don't go down. Now, interestingly enough, if I was Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai says you do 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, like the Parei HaChag. Beis Hillel says, what? What did the Parei HaChag got to do with anything? That's what I would have said. But that's not what Beis Hillel says. Beis Hillel says, I hear what you're saying. And nonetheless, yeah, we have a principle, Malam v'kodesh ve'en moridin. You always go up in Kedusha. And as we know, we paskin like Beis Hillel. And so we light 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And on Zos Chanukah, the menorah is full. And it has reached its most intense expression. So, let me give you an example. We count 49 years until the Yovel, the Jubilee year. And it says you count 7 years 7 times. Now, we do not count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Because every cycle we're going through it, but we're doing it on a higher level. We're always going up, which is what we're supposed to be doing. Rav Dessler writes, it's the same thing every Shabbos. It's supposed to be every week. We're not just doing Shabbos again, but we're doing each week like a spiral and moving up to a higher level of the Shabbos that we had beforehand. Good insight into life. Don't do it again. Do it better. Do it higher. Do it more. Lift it up a little bit. So that's how we count. We could just as easily light the same amount of candles every single day, which is the mitzvah and the Mahadran mitzvah. But for Mahadran and Mahadran, we say Malim B'Kodesh. which means that the experience of Hanukkah is supposed to grow more intense with every passing day. And the second day of Hanukkah should be brighter than the first day, and the third day, and the fourth day, until you reach the eighth day, when the menorah is full. Those of you who have a lot of people in your house lighting menorahs, so you know when you reach Zos Hanukkah, the amount of light that's given off by all of those menorahs is tremendous. You see them all filled up. 9 candles apiece, 8 for Hanukkah and 1 for the Shamash. And all of these candles are burning. It's a powerful sight to see. And that means that Zos Hanukkah is more intense. So we're at the end of Hanukkah, which is the most intense expression of what Hanukkah is supposed to be. But I want to spend a little time talking about this machlekes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai also knows that there's a concept of Malam B'Kodesh Ve'ema Ridin. So how come they say to go to 8-7-6-5-4-3-2-1 instead of going up like Beis Hillel? They recognize the concept. And they say, well, we learned from the Parei Chag. So there's a lot of answers to this question. But I want to focus, if I can, on the answer of the Pnei Yeshua, who says, absolutely beautiful insight. If you have a Jewish education, then everybody knows the famous Beis Yosef's Kasha. Beis Yosef's Kasha is, they found a little container of oil. It was enough for one day. So one day is not a miracle. 7 days are a miracle. So we should only celebrate Hanukkah for 7 days. He gives some terutzim, and many people give terutzim to what's known as the Beis Yosef's Kasha. Even people who lived before the Beis Yosef, they say he's answering the Beis Yosef's Kasha. He got the credit for the question, even though other people asked it beforehand. And there are many different answers. One is, the first day was celebrating the military victory, which was an unbelievable miracle. Purim, we didn't have an open miracle like that. Everything was political intrigue behind the scenes. Here, Rabim Ba'ad Ma'atim, very few people beat this tremendous army. The weak fought the strong. The pure fought the impure. The tzaddikim fought the rishayim. It was an unbelievable miracle. That's what we're celebrating the first day. Others say the very fact that they were able to find the Pach Shemen, this little cruse of oil, was a miracle, because you see that the Greeks, as we spoke about last time, went out of their way to metame all of the oil. So the fact that you could find a pure oil was an unbelievable miracle. Some people say the first day is celebrating the rededication of the Beis HaMikdash. And in fact, Hanukkah is seen as the dedication of the second Beis HaMikdash. When the second Beis HaMikdash was dedicated under Ezra and Nehemiah and Zerubbabel, that day is not celebrated. Hanukkah is celebrated as the dedication of the second Beis HaMikdash. And we mentioned this, I think, in the past, that when Moshe was building the Mishkan, he finished it on Hanukkah, but he waited till Rosh Chodesh Nisan to put it up. So Hanukkah got the dedication of the second Beis HaMikdash. When Shlomo HaMelech was building the first Beis HaMikdash, he finished it in Mar Cheshvan, but he waited till Tishrei to put it up. So Mar Cheshvan will be the time when we dedicate the third Beis HaMikdash. It'll be made up to it. So that's what we're celebrating. There's all kinds of different answers that are given. So the Pnei Yeshua says like this. He was a smart guy, so it's a little novel approach. He rejects the idea that Parei Chag is the reason why Beis Shammai says to go 8-7-6-5-4-3-2-1. He rejects that. He says the only reason he brings Parei Chag is to answer Beis Hillel's objection. Beis Hillel says when it comes to matters of holiness, we always go up and we don't go down. And Beis Shammai says, well, I can show you an example of where we go down, and that's the bulls that are offered up on Sukkot. We go down there. So I have a precedent where we don't say Malim B'Kodesh only. It sometimes goes down. He says, so what were they really arguing about? So, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai are arguing about perspective. What do I mean by perspective? What do you look at? And he asks the famous Beis Yosef's kasha, why do we celebrate 8 days? And he says, there's no way they filled up the menorah and it just kept burning for 8 days, because you have a mitzvah of Trumas Hadeshin of the menorah. You have to clean it out and put in new oil every day. So at the end of the first day, even if it was still burning, they would have to clean it out and put in new oil. He says the miracle was this. They took the pach shemen and they filled up the candles completely. It was completely full. And they put the pach shemen, and it was only 7/8 full, which means only 1/8 of the oil went in. And every day when they filled up the menorah, the pach shemen went down 1/8. So it says Beis Shammai, you know where the miracle was? The miracle was not that the candles were burning. The miracle was in the pach shemen. And the way we light the menorah is to commemorate the pach shemen that had 8 portions, and then 7, and then 6, and then 5, and 4, 3, 2, 1. And when you look at the candles, that's where the miracle was. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And Beis Hillel says, yeah, but who saw the pach shemen? The Kohen who was lighting the menorah saw the pach shemen. Nobody else saw it. All anyone knew is we had enough oil for 1 day and it burned for 8 days. So from our perspective of looking at the menorah, we see, oh my goodness, it's burning for a 2nd day. It's burning for a 3rd day, a 4th day. And every day that we look at it burning gives us a deeper insight into the miracle. The Seder, if you looked at the pach shemen, you knew that right away. But no one saw the pach shemen. But everyone saw the menorah. So, to a certain extent, you could say that the machlekes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is whether we look at what's going on underneath the surface or what's happening begoloi, which you actually see. There are people who have a lot of potential. And if you look inside of the person, you see all this potential. It's like unbelievable. But we celebrate the realization of the potential, not the potential itself. Some people have a lot of money. A lot of money. Yeah. My son, Pesach, goes to Florida with 2 friends who are doing well in real estate. They go down to Orlando. They rent 2 houses. Everybody gets 2, 3 bedrooms, whatever you need. The other house is for eating, the meals. They have a minion over there, and the staff stays there. They brought in a chef from a very fancy restaurant, and the next year they realized that he couldn't really handle everything himself, so they brought in his manager from the restaurant to manage him and make sure that all the technical things are taken care of. They have housekeepers, they have babysitters, you know. It's pretty fancy setup they have there. And my son tells me all the time, that's not called rich. You don't know what rich is. And it's true. I don't know. Well, I have told this story in the past. I was in America once and, I bought a Powerball ticket. I think it was like at $800 million. And my son bought a Powerball ticket. And I said, you're wasting your time. I've already won. And he said, why? Why would you win? What would you do with that money? And I thought about it. And the first thing I said was, well, I'd fix up my car. He says, that's how small you think. Not even I'll buy myself a fancy car. I'll fix up my little Honda that I have now. That to you is your dream. Fix up my 10-year-old Honda. He says, no, let's go. You'll buy apartments for your kids. You'll buy cars for your kids. Now what? What are you going to do with the rest of the money? I can't even think that way. $800 million. What would I do with it? But he says, I know people who own their own planes. That's a lot of money to maintain a plane. I know people who take over, a whole floor of a hotel when they go away. I know people who do anything that they want. That kind of money. And of course, to me, I'm still scraping the cottage cheese off of the cover because, I don't want it to go to waste. And I crack an egg and I pull out all of the inside of it because I don't want to throw away a little bit of it. I'm coming from a different perspective. That's how I grew up. Not really appreciating what it is to have money. But there are people who live very well. And what do they do with that money? So I know people who have money and they look at the money as a burden. I have an obligation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave me this money and he's going to ask me what I did with it. And they're very conscious of this. I know two people that I've met in my life who live very simply, not poor. They drive a van and they live in a modest home and their kids don't wear designer clothes, and they pay full tuition. And both of these people were fabulously wealthy. They give away 90% of their money to tzedakah. There's a fascinating story that I heard many years ago. Libby Omer, it's in one of the Maggid books. Rothschild, the original Rothschild, Anshel Meyer Rothschild, who was from fellow. He's in a carriage. He's on his way to wherever he's going for Shabbos. And the wheel breaks. This is something we cannot understand, what it means when you would drive in a horse and carriage. These wheels were made out of wood. They were held on by a little wooden knob. They were breaking all the time. I read a biography of Peter the Great, and they said one of his greatest accomplishments is how much he traveled on these rutted, pitted dirt roads with horse and carriage. You know how hard this was to get around? Anyway, it's Erev Shabbos, and the wheel breaks. So the guy's trying to fix it, and Anshel Meir says, I have a minhag, I don't travel Erev Shabbos after Chatzos. He says, look, I don't know when I'm going to get this fixed, but if you're nervous, just walk. I'm sure there's a town coming up, and you'll go there. Okay. So he leaves his luggage behind, and he walks. And he's walking, and by the time he gets there, he's wearing very fancy clothes. They're all dirty, his shoes are all caked with mud. He does not look like a Rothschild. And he comes into town, and he says, can anybody put me up for Shabbos? And I look at this guy, he's pretty disheveled looking. So they say, you know what, why don't you go to the Melamed? The Melamed was the poorest guy in town, traditionally. I remember it said, Rashi in Parshas Vayechi, Yaakov says to Shimon and Levi, Hashem should split you up in Klal Yisrael. And Rashi brings down a Gemara that there are no Aniyim or Melamdei Tinokos who don't come from Shimon. Of course, poor people have to travel around to beg for money, and Melamdei Tinokos go wherever there's somebody who wants to hire them to teach. So I saw this Rashi, and someone said to me, what's the Kefal Lashon? Just say Malamdei Tinokas, and we'll know already you're talking about a niyam. Yeah. But anyway, so he says that, the Malamed. So you go to the Malamed. He has a very simple house, and he's got a bunch of kindlech, and everything is very simple. So he sees this fellow come in. He has no idea who he is. And he says, I need a place for Shabbos. He says, of course. He says, Yankala, go and bring a clean pile of straw for our guest. And they throw a little sheet over it, and find him a pillow and a blanket. And he says, listen, let me give you some clothes because you can't go on Shabbos like that. And he gives him a clean pair of whatever clothes he wore, burlap, I don't know what it is, And Shlomeah was happy. He had a place for Shabbos. Anyway, he goes to shul. He's sitting with the Malamed in the back of the shul, with all the poor people. And he sees sitting up front is this usher, the usher of the town. And he's sitting there like he runs the town. And he does. And before they ask anyone to daven, they ask him, can we ask this guy to daven? And he either says yes or no. Can we give this one an aliyah? Can we do this? Can we do that? Whatever it is. He makes all the decision. He sits up front. He's the king. So they give An Shlomeah an aliyah. And at the end he says, you want to make a mishaberach? He says, sure. Figure what's this guy going to give? So he says, what do you want to give? So he points at the usher and says, I will give 10 times his net value. And the whole town's like, what is that? Who's this guy? He's embarrassing him? The Gabbai says, listen, don't make fun of this fellow. He goes, did you hear my name when you called me up, An Shlomeah? Do you know any An Shlomeahs? He goes, well, the only An Shlomeah I know is Rothschild. And everyone goes, and the Malamed faints, you know what I mean? He says, I got Rothschild in my house. Anyway, at the end, everyone comes over and says, please, An Shlomeah, come to my house for the Suda. He goes, it's okay, I'm staying with the Malamed, yeah. After Shabbos, he sends for his financial people, and they do an audit. And when they finish the audit, it turns out that this usher is in debt. He doesn't have any real money. It's all a facade. And the next Shabbos, An Shlomeah, now dressed like a Rothschild, gets up in shul. And he says, I knew right away that this person didn't have any money. Because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives money to people who are going to use it as an obligation to Klal Yisrael. It's not my money. It belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He gave it to me, and he's going to ask for an accounting of every penny. So you see, rich people, it's a lot of potential. What could you do with it? Those of us who are in Klal work, how many times have we gone to rich people and asked them, could you help with this? Could you help with that? Can you do like this? And they're like, look, we get hit on a lot of different people come to us, we have to make a decision, I can't give everywhere, I can't do to everybody, So, okay. It's definitely true, you can't give to everybody. But do I have a sense of obligation? The Maggid tells a story about this fellow. He would give tzedakah to anybody he could. He wasn't rich. But he would give everybody some money. And eventually one guy came at the end of the day. He had no money left. He had nothing to give. The guy walked away disappointed. And he chases after him. He says, wait, I can give you some money. I just figured out, if I don't use wine for Kiddush and I make Kiddush on Hamotzi, I can save X amount a year. Now this year I'm only going to make Kiddush on Challah. I'll give you that money. That's how I look at it. What's my obligation to the tzibur that Hashem gave me? Yeah. I've told this story before, and I know people out there know all my stuff. They have things that are called value clarifications. They're exercises that help you figure out. So this is the story. I was at a youth group once doing an oneg. I was asked to speak. And they were doing a value clarification with the kids. Here's the story. Romeo and Juliet are in love. But Romeo is on Crocodile Island. It's called Crocodile Island because the river is filled with crocodiles. There's no way to get across except with the ferryman. And Juliet wants to go to Romeo, but she can't because of the crocodiles. So she goes to the boatman, and he looks at her and says, I will take you across on one condition, that you sleep with me. Well, she doesn't want to be disloyal to Romeo. She doesn't know what to do. She's beside herself. And she goes to ask wise Ivan. And he says, I don't want to get involved. Okay, so she feels she has no choice. She pays the boatman's price. And when she comes across, Romeo is so thrilled to see her. And he says, how did you ever get the boatman to take you over? And when she tells him what she did, he casts her away. And she's broken because she gave up everything just to be with Romeo, and Romeo has thrown me away. And she tells her friend Sluggo, and Sluggo is so angry, he beats up Romeo. And as Romeo is lying there, battered, bruised, and bloody, Juliet laughs. The end. And the question is, who's the worst person in the story? There are no good people. There are only bad people in the story. Who's the worst? Well, afterwards I was listening to the discussion. Some people say Sluggo, because there's never an excuse to use violence, even if you're very upset. Some people say Juliet, she did this terrible thing, and then she gets Romeo beaten up, and then she's laughing. Some people say Romeo, because everybody was motivated by self-interest. He was just motivated by rejection. And everybody was arguing. When I heard this for the first time, they said, who's the worst person in the story? I said immediately, wise Ivan. And everyone looked at me and said, what? I said, he's the only one who could have prevented this. If he would have given Juliet the right advice, this never would have happened. And the person said, no one ever chooses wise Ivan. Says, that shows that in your vision of what's right and wrong, the worst thing you could do is not help somebody. That's how you view life. And it's for sure true. Right? Everybody has an obligation. I have been asked at times why I don't charge for the podcast. Or someone said, at least do part of it and then put the rest of it behind a paywall, say to listen to the rest of it, the rest of the show, do this, that. I said, because Moshe Shapiro said to me, anyone who can give people chizik b'zman hazeh is mechuyev to do it. And that's it. I'm not doing it for any selfish motivation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, again, we have no sponsors left because at least we need money to cover our production costs and things. But in the meantime, the idea is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you talents and you're going to use it. Or you're not. I've told this story in the past. People have heard almost all my stories. Every now and then I pull in a new one. People are surprised. I've told this story. I was in LA. And I don't know how to put this. I'm frightfully talented. I could have gone into professional entertainment. I'm pretty sure. Not sure. I'm pretty sure. And when I was in LA, that's the entertainment capital of the world, I was teaching, and I was teaching the way I always do, and with stories and jokes, and try to be entertaining and meaningful. And one of the kids in the school, his father was a Hollywood agent, and he says to me, kid, you've got what it takes. He says, I want to represent you. Gave me his card. And he says, we'll put together a stand-up routine, we'll work the clubs, and I see you having your own TV show in 3 years. I said, let me think about it. And I said to myself, Well, here's what I told my Yetzer Hara. What I told my Yetzer Hara is, you know how many people have heard this line beforehand? And all the stars that never were are parking cars and pumping gas. Do you know the way to San Jose? That line always stuck with me. Everybody thinks they're going to be a star. Gosh, how many people actually are successful? So I said, nah, he's giving me a story. I'm not going to make it. But what I told myself was, I said, let's say he's right. And I get my own show. And somehow I manage to stay from, and I get to keep Shabbos. Not easy to do. Stephen Hill starred in a television show called Mission Impossible. It was a hit. And he was a starring role. And he became frum, and he realized there was no way he could do this and keep Shabbos and stay frum. So he gave it up. To give up the lead in a hit show is something that is hard to understand, especially back then, the 1960s, when Hollywood was Hollywood, yeah. And give that up. I said, let's say I managed to stay frum. I'm not like Stephen Hill. I could get them to only film during the week and not to film on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Let's say, Bo Nagid. Yeah. So at the end of my life, I get up to Shemayim. And Kodesh Baruch Hu says, so, what'd you do with your life? I was like, what, you never saw my show? Instead of Seinfeld being the #1 show, it was Orlofsky, I was a star. I was this, I was that, you never saw me on Johnny Carson. I was here, I was that, a star, she'ein kamohu. And then Kodesh Baruch Hu would say, that's what you did? I gave you koiches to communicate Torah ideas, and you used it to tell jokes instead and make money and get famous instead of working for me? That's what I said to myself. What I told my Yetzer Hara is, it's a lot of bluff, I'll never make it anyway. But every now and then I would speak to a group from Los Angeles, and there would be some actors and directors and people in the film industry. And I would do my usual, presentation. And people would come up to me afterwards and they'd say, wow, Rabbi, that was unbelievable. I said, you think I could make it? And they'd hand me their agent's card. And said, call the agent, tell him I told you to call. One time I had a stack of them. I don't know where they are now. Could have made it big. And then what? Potential. I would have been potential. What could have been? What if the Panovich Rav didn't build Bnei Brak, the Panovich Yeshiva? All the people who went out and did great things in the world, what if they didn't do it? They had the potential. You could see it if you looked on the inside, but you never saw it burning on the menorah. It was never expressed externally. You never got to see it and what the person was supposed to do. So there's two ways to look at the miracle of Hanukkah. You can look at the Pach Shemen and say, I can see the miracle inside the little jar of oil. I can look at the menorah and see what actually happens. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you could have done. It matters what you did. The Chazal say a mitzvah is only called after the person who finishes it, even if it wasn't your fault. Klal Yisrael got credit for bringing Atzmos Yosef to be buried in Eretz Yisrael, even though Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who was Moshe Nefesh, and he searched around and he found the Atzmos Yosef and he brought it out and he did everything, but he didn't bury it because he couldn't go into Eretz Yisrael. It wasn't his fault. But you had an opportunity and you didn't take advantage of it. It's not my fault. No one's saying it's your fault. You had great potential, but you never fulfilled it. I could have been somebody. I could have done something. How many times do you hear people say that? Somebody should do something. Yeah, somebody should do something. I'm something of a social critic. It comes with the territory. And I was recently giving a shiur, and I was talking about all the different problems, not all of the different problems, some of the problems in Klal Yisrael. People said to me, why doesn't anybody do something? I said, I am. If I have to save Klal Yisrael by myself, I will. If you help me, there'll be two of us. I'm not giving up. I'll do whatever I can do. I'll put myself forward. And just because you can't do everything doesn't mean you can't do anything. I've told this story. It's in the first Chicken Soup of the Soul book, where this guy is walking on the beach and he sees these starfish that have been washed up on the beach, and he's picking them up and throwing them back into the sea. And the guy says to him, what are you doing? He says, well, they're outside of the water. They're going to dry up and die. He says, but there are thousands of starfish, and this is happening on beaches all around the world. You can't make a difference. And he picked up another one and threw it and said, made a difference to him. You don't know how many people you make a difference to. You're unaware. Because trust me, if you knew, you'd be much more conscious of it. Every time you have an opportunity to make a Kiddush Hashem, sometimes I'll settle just not to make a Chilul Hashem. But every time you have a chance that a person looks at you and says, this is a from Jew. I live in Israel, my Hebrew is not that good. But I make an effort. I say hello to anybody that I can. I try to say a kind word. Before Rosh Hashanah, I was waiting online in this supermarket. It was a madhouse. Everybody's yelling at this cashier. Middle-aged woman. And I got up to the checkout and I said to her, Kol Kavod. I said, this is not a job, this is a chesed. You're helping people make yantif. This is a tremendous thing. I see you working, and it's really something special. Can I get you a drink? Can I get you a cup of coffee or something? She says, no, I have a break coming up. I said, just wanted to tell you, from my point of view, I think what you're doing is a tremendous thing. I hope she walked away feeling a little better. I walked into an elevator, and like I say, I can communicate in Hebrew, make myself understood, but I can't really speak in Hebrew, because you have to know all of the right words and the right nuances. There was one time, I'm very conscious of the fact that my grammar is terrible, and one time I spoke, and I said, my dikduk is not very good, and this fellow says, no, it's non-existent. First person, second person, third person, past, present, future, feminine, masculine, it's all one thing to you. You can mix all of those things together in one sentence. So I get a little better. So one time I practiced before I spoke in my head what I was going to say. And my son was there, and afterwards I said, so how was that? He goes, okay. I said, well, I didn't make any mistakes. He says, no, but you have the vocabulary of a third grader. And it's true. I don't have the words. I don't know how to communicate, So they have this thing in Israel where, in America you buy a coffee. So they put in hot coffee, they put in cold milk. That's a coffee. Yeah. Here, almost nobody drinks what you would call a coffee when you go out to a coffee place. They have a cappuccino, they have an espresso, and they have what's called a kafeh hafuch, where they put in the coffee and they put in hot milk. The upside down coffee. Yeah. Okay. It's Israelis go for the hot milk more, Somebody said once, in the pasuk by Yehuda in Parshas Vayechi, where it talks about, Rashi says, chalav, or it's a chazal actually, that you give milk to someone as a chesed. He says, so when an American tells us over, he says, you give somebody a cold glass of milk. When you say to an Israeli, you give somebody a hot cup of milk. Anyway, I was in a building, and a lot of Israelis are already on the edge before you even start, I walk into the elevator, and somebody had apparently spilled the coffee and didn't bother to pick it up. And everybody is standing in the perimeter of this puddle, and they're really annoyed. And I walk in, I look, I go, cafe hafuch. Upside down coffee. And everybody laughed, and it broke the tension. And there was nobody there religious in the elevator. I hope they walked away with a slightly different impression of religious Jews. But every time you look at somebody, you say, okay, I have an obligation here. I just saw a clip of an Israeli comic, someplace in Europe. And somebody screams out, free Palestine, And he says, what do you want from me? He says, I don't know why every single Israeli, when they go abroad, suddenly become a representative of the government. I'm not in charge. I don't do anything. I'm a comedian. I tell jokes. What do you want from me? So he says, look at all the Palestinians who were killed. He goes, look at all the Israelis who were killed. Oh, there weren't enough of us? That's what you're worried about? Okay, so we'll have to make sure more Israelis get killed. So he goes, Shlomo, don't use tanks anymore. Everyone should go in on scooters. This way we'll get many more Jews killed. Then you'll feel better, because there'll be more Jews killed. That's the attitude, It was such an interesting idea. But it means, every frum Jew who walks out is a representative of the entire Jewish people. It's not fair. It's not right. But how you behave and what you do is going to reflect upon all of us. And I have been in situations. Tower Air, if anybody remembers Tower Air. They used to have an early check-in in Yerushalayim. It's a very long line. Everybody wants to check in early. So I'm waiting online, and this Rosh Hashiva, long beard and a frock and a Hamburg, he comes in and says something to one of the people there, and she moves him to the head of the line. So one of the secular people in the line screams out and says, Mazeh, makara. So he goes, Slicha, I'm in a hurry. He says, we're all in a hurry. We all have things to do. And he started screaming at him and said, Ani Rosh Hashiva, Ata Kelev, you're a dog. Don't you open your mouth. I don't want to hear from you. The whole thing, they screamed. I don't think I was the only religious person in the line who was hoping that the earth would open up and swallow me alive. A terrible thing, I was sitting on a plane once next to this secular fellow. And, you have these Haredi passengers who come in late. And he's got a big, giant roll bag, and everything is full. So she says, I'm going to have to check the bag. He goes, no, I need the bag. He goes, but there's no room. He says, so take out somebody else's bag. Put my bag in. So I can't take out somebody else's bag. And everyone's screaming, sit down, we're waiting to take off. He goes, I want a bag. Anyway, this guy starts saying, I don't know who these people think they are. And so entitled, I couldn't offer any defense. I sat there quietly. And after we finally took off, he had the little earphones that you get on the plane. And I have a pair of good earphones, Sony ones. And I said, would you like to borrow my earphones? And he says, you're not going to use them? I said, no, I'm tired. I'm going to go to sleep, etc. He says, but I said, these are good ones. You'll enjoy them. And he took them on. He said, thank you so much. It was the best I could do. I can't make up for everybody who's unfortunately not representing Klal Yisrael the way they're supposed to. And people have so much potential. There's so much good that we can do. I'm going to tell you something that I believe 100%. Is it possible that I'm wrong? It's possible. I didn't do an accounting. I have met a dozen people who said to me, I wish I could have more children, but I can't afford the tuitions. We have set up a chinuch system that discourages Jews from having children. There's something wrong with that. So The person said to me, well, because the school's this. And I said, you don't think there's enough money in the frum community to underwrite tuition for every single kid in school so that nobody has to pay more than $1,000? You don't think that money exists? Look at the money that's being spent on all kinds of things, big houses, big cars, fancy vacations, big trips. I'm not talking about going away for Pesach to the Nof Kinneret in Tveria with the Rabbi Orlofsky program. It's reasonably priced, and it's a spiritual adventure. We're not doing this for to take it to Disneyland and have Mickey Mouse run your Seder. You know what I mean? This is something that's a spiritual thing. But the amount of money that's being spent on stuff, and you're telling me that we can't solve a tuition crisis? Of course we can. We just don't want to. It's just not important enough to us. We lack the will. We don't lack the ability. But who's going to stand up and solve this problem? Who's going to deal with it? There was a big problem that there weren't enough yeshiva katanas. And there were kids, that's like a high school here in Israel. And kids couldn't get into yeshiva katana. I'll tell you something really harif. I won't tell you who it was, but it was a very famous Adam Gadol. There was, when the 2 bus blew up, it was all filled with frum people. There were certain people sent around sound trucks and posters and said, it's because women wear sheitlach. That's why the bus blew up. So someone asked this Adam Gadol, very well-known person, and he said, sheitlach? The tears of the mothers who can't get their sons into yeshiva katana is enough to blow up 10 buses. What he said. So Rashach sent out a call and said, anybody who opens up a yeshiva katana, I will be their nasi, I will write them a letter, I'll do whatever I can to help them raise the funds. And suddenly there was a whole bunch of yeshiva katanas that opened up, and the crisis ended. Because Rashach said, someone has to do something, I'm going to do it. An amazing thing. Every one of us can do something. Every one of us can help. We're not the Gadol Ador. We're not a big Rav. We may not be a millionaire or a billionaire, although I don't know who listens to the show. But every one of us can help in some way. And when we look at a situation and we say, I've got the potential, that's the Pach Shemen. That's Beis Shammai. But that's not what we look at. We look at what did you do with that potential? Where did it take you? What did you do to make the world a better place? And Amir Hashem, that's something that if we understand that on this Zos Chanukah, we can use this Yontif to use all of that power to be able to, Amir Hashem, help us make the world into the place that it's supposed to be. Apparently, I always misquoted RFK, yeah, Robert Kennedy, who said this. I thought it was John Kennedy. Someone corrected me, it was Robert Kennedy. Some people look at the world the way it is and ask why. I look at the way the world could be and ask why not. The only difference is every one of us taking our potential and developing it to shine, to make the world into the place it should be. And as always, my producer sends me some nice letters. Hi, I want to thank you for all the shiurim. I'm a very yeshivish guy from Lakewood. And though I don't necessarily agree with all your opinions, I still listen to you more than anyone else because you're real honest and logical. Something that's very rare these days. Thank you very much. I can't ask for more than that. I don't expect people to agree with me on everything, just most things. Hi, Rabbi. I'm currently in Chavetz Chaim Yeshiva in Queens. I just wanted to let you know that the Rosh Yeshiva Harris mentioned in Hashkafa that he really enjoys listening to you. Well, he is a very, very special individual. I had the schus. He was my Rosh Yeshiva in Rochester. And thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And that's it for this episode. If you want to find out more about the show, you can go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com. And you can sponsor an episode, please. We have no sponsors left. You could sponsor a Parsha in 5. You can sponsor a question and answer. You can submit a question. You can make a comment. You could sign up for one of our online shiurim, tefillah on Sunday for men and women, Mesilas Yesharim for women on Monday night, and Daf Yomi for men every day except for Shabbos. And there's other material there. And again, just mention anyone who would like to come and join us for Pesach. We would love to have you along for the experience. It looks like it's going to be a lot of fun, and we'd love to have you there if you're part of our community. And that's it for now. Until next time, I am David Orlofsky, and this has been the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
The Rabbi Orlofsky Show, Torah and Simcha, ready to go. The Rabbi Orlofsky Show, knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode, and we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.